Hello. All right. This is a video about my new book, Art and DIY Electronics by Garnet Hertz from MIT Press. Just came out today. I've been waiting for the mail to be delivered, and I just got this book, and I just sat down and I'm making videos. I'm making short videos about each chapter to provide a very quick and dirty DIY approach to having an overview of what is included here, because there's honestly tons of stuff. Um, I've been working on this project for like a decade and a half, so um, it's actually a rewriting of my doctoral dissertation that I did with Mark Poster, which I started that in 2005. So it's been a ways going. Anyhow, so I talk in this video. I talk about chapter 1.3, frugality and the toaster project, technical disorientation, device paradigms, and high-lowness. Now, this is in a cluster of chapters around frugality and innovation, building and inventing stuff and creating stuff with a lack of resources. Here we go. We've already talked about SRL. We've already talked about telephonic arm wrestling. And now we get on to an artisanally made toaster. Now, this is one project that people may have seen. Thomas Thwaites did a pretty brilliant TED Talk that was quite popular, and does a lot of other really fabulous work, and works as a designer. He doesn't work as an artist. So this chapter talks about starting to build something with technology and kind of getting lost in the process. I call it technical disorientation, and I relate this to a term by Albert Borgmann called device paradigms. I also introduce a concept called high-lowness, high tech and low tech, simultaneously. So this project, this toaster was built completely from scratch by British designer Thomas Thwaites, where he started by going to his local big box store, and he bought the cheapest toaster he could find. He ripped it apart into all these different components, kind of meticulously disassembled it, and he wanted to try to make a toaster from scratch, just like the one that they sell in stores, and trying to do it on a domestic scale, not with industrial tools. What he ended up with, instead of a toaster, is this thing. And it's really fabulous, and we can learn a lot from it. There's been quite a bit written about this, but I think it still has more mileage. So this project is sort of like an example of somebody really going through the process of here's the interior of the toaster, going through the process of building something from scratch, and really kind of saying, like, what could people actually make on their own that resembles contemporary technology if you had to dig it out of the ground with your hands, so to speak. This is what it would kind of look like. And that's why it's kind of such an elegant project. Now, I use this in comparison to, and compare it to Albert Borgmann's idea of the device paradigm. And it's this idea that technological information rests on a substratum of machinery that is becoming concealed from the understanding of those who operate on its surface. The black boxing that is a consequence of progress in information technology encloses in ever larger spaces of hardware and software. It's an unavoidable development. The larger black boxes support more powerful tools. That was a quote. And actually, a lot of this text, I've really tried to make it in simple, easy to understand academic English. I really do try to not have more BS language than I need. I really want this to be read by a wide audience, and I think that it can be, and it will be, I think. Um, so, device paradigms, um, it's sort of like the idea of the object. Borgmann presents an example of a watch. It can be mechanical, electronic, or exist as a mobile phone app with highly variable mechanisms behind each. But Borgmann sees the functional device paradigm as driving the device, its watchness. The softwareness or brassness is less of an issue for the end user than its ability to keep time. So I talk about this idea of devices and a device paradigm, and I talk about how artists really kind of like can dig into this and explore this as a whole terrain, and how it shifts into what I term a focal thing. Now, actually, I'm not going to explain that here. You're going to have to read this to get that. Okay. Now, another thing that I think the Toaster Project illustrates is that there's a burden in doing things yourself. You often get overwhelmed technically with what you need to do, and you often get sidetracked in trying to be self-sufficient. And this is a great kind of symbol of that, about how, or sort of struggling with materials, and being kind of overwhelmed with kind of unpacking the black box of how that technology is built. Now, I also use this to talk about the idea of open source hardware. And actually, I take the perspective that there's kind of no such thing as open source hardware, or at least it's a pretty misleading term. Open source hardware isn't like open source software. Open source software, you can transmit a lot more of the infrastructural information inside of the code. Open source hardware projects is much more complicated to translate all of the required things needed to build something. The whole supply chain, how it's built, how it's physically done. And I use this project of the Global Village construction set, which I think is a really cool project that tries to build an open source ecology of machines that anybody can build. Started in 2003, but the problem with open source kind of hardware projects is they often promise to be really revolutionary, but they're honestly really difficult to build, and they very often overlook the infrastructures that they depend on. So I would make the argument that the Global Village construction set has limited use. It's difficult for people to build all their own stuff. You often end up, when people build their own stuff, it often looks like this more than this. This is the work of experienced engineers more so than people. I mean, engineers are people. I do acknowledge that, but yeah. So, what can we learn from an artisanal toaster? I would say that this is what DIY looks like in general. This is what DIY practice does. It struggles with materials. It's difficult to do. It is often overwhelming. And this is okay. And this is part of the whole process of DIY practice. So, what can we learn from this toaster? It's hard to make stuff, but it's fun, and it can be revolutionary and enlightening, just like Thomas Thwaites' project. So, that's an overview of that chapter, chapter 1.3 in my Art and DIY Electronics from MIT Press. Available now at a bookstore near you.